Imagine waking up one day, after a month of fasting, prayer, and devotion, only to feel a haunting sense of emptiness. The Ramadan that was supposed to bring you closer to Allah, to rejuvenate your spirit, and to transform your life, has come and gone, leaving you with a nagging feeling that something is missing. You look around and see that you're not alone in this feeling. Many of your friends, family members, and fellow Muslims seem to be going through the motions, performing the rituals, but lacking the depth, the passion, and the connection that Ramadan is supposed to bring. You begin to wonder, is it me? Am I the one who's missing the point? You reflect on your actions, your intentions, and your devotion. But the more you think about it, the more you realize that the problem runs deeper. It's not just you, it's a widespread phenomenon that affects millions of Muslims around the world. Why is it that despite our best efforts, despite our sacrifice, and despite our devotion, we often find ourselves feeling unfulfilled, disconnected, and spiritually drained? What is it about Ramadan that we're missing? What is the true purpose of this blessed month, and how can we reclaim it? As you ponder these questions, you begin to notice a strange paradox. On one hand, Ramadan is a time of great spiritual opportunity, a chance to connect with Allah, to seek forgiveness, and to transform our lives. On the other hand, it's also a time of great distraction, a time when we're bombarded with advertisements, social media notifications, and endless invitations to iftar parties and other events. How can we reconcile this paradox? How can we focus on the true purpose of Ramadan when we're surrounded by so many distractions? What is the true purpose of Ramadan, and how can we reclaim it? As we explore these questions, let's begin by examining the way we approach Ramadan. Do we see it as a time of spiritual renewal, or do we view it as a social event, a chance to connect with friends and family? Do we focus on the rituals, the fasting, the prayer, and the charity, or do we look deeper, seeking to understand the underlying principles and values that guide our actions? These questions are not easy to answer, but they're essential if we want to understand why most people miss the true purpose of Ramadan. As we delve deeper into this topic, let's keep in mind that the answers we seek are not just intellectual or theoretical. They're deeply personal and spiritual. They require us to confront our own motivations, our own intentions, and our own actions. So, let's take a step back, reflect on our approach to Ramadan, and ask ourselves, what am I really seeking in this blessed month? Is it spiritual growth, self-improvement, or something more superficial? As we explore this question, we'll begin to uncover the hidden dynamics that shape our experience of Ramadan, and we'll discover why most people miss the true purpose of this sacred month. As we reflect on our approach to Ramadan, we begin to realize that the problem runs deeper than we initially thought. It's not just about being distracted or lacking motivation. It's about a fundamental misunderstanding of the purpose of Ramadan. According to Imam al-Ghazali, one of the greatest Islamic scholars of all time, the purpose of Ramadan is not just to abstain from food and drink, but to abstain from the desires of the ego. In other words, Ramadan is not just about physical fasting, but about spiritual fasting, fasting from the desires, the ego, and the worldly attachments that distract us from Allah. But why is it that we often miss this deeper purpose of Ramadan? Why do we focus on the external rituals rather than the internal transformation? One reason is that we live in a world that is increasingly focused on the external, the material, and the superficial. We're constantly bombarded with messages that tell us that happiness, success, and fulfillment come from external sources, from wealth, status, power, and possessions. We're taught to measure our self-worth by our achievements, our appearance, and our social media following. As a result, we often approach Ramadan with the same external focus. We focus on the external rituals, the social events, and the material benefits rather than the internal transformation. We measure our success in Ramadan by the number of prayers we perform, the number of Quranic verses we recite, and the number of iftar parties we attend, rather than by the depth of our spiritual connection, the purity of our intentions, and the transformation of our hearts. But this external focus is precisely the problem, is the reason why we often feel unfulfilled, disconnected, and spiritually drained despite our best efforts. It's the reason why we miss the true purpose of Ramadan. As Ibn Qayyim, another great Islamic scholar, once said, "The heart is like a mirror, it reflects what is in front of it. If it is faced with the world, it will reflect the world. But if it is faced with Allah, it will reflect Allah." In other words, our hearts are like mirrors that reflect what we focus on. If we focus on the external world, our hearts will reflect the world. But if we focus on Allah, our hearts will reflect Allah. So the question is, what are we focusing on in Ramadan? Are we focusing on the external rituals? Or are we focusing on the internal transformation? Are we reflecting the world, or are we reflecting Allah? As we explore this question, let's keep in mind that the answer is not just intellectual or theoretical. It's deeply personal and spiritual. It requires us to confront our own motivations, our own intentions, and our own actions. So, let's take a step back, reflect on our approach to Ramadan, and ask ourselves, what am I really focusing on in this blessed month? Is it the external rituals, or is it the internal transformation? Is it the world, or is it Allah? As we continue to reflect on our approach to Ramadan, we begin to realize that the consequences of our actions are far more profound than we initially thought. The way we approach Ramadan has a ripple effect on our lives, shaping our relationships, our habits, and our very souls. One of the most significant consequences of our external focus is the erosion of our spiritual identity. When we focus on the external rituals and social events, we begin to define ourselves by our actions rather than our intentions. We start to see ourselves as good Muslims because we perform the rituals rather than because we have a deep connection with Allah. But this external definition of ourselves is fragile and fleeting. It's based on our actions, which can change from day to day, rather than on our intentions, which are rooted in our hearts. As a result, we become vulnerable to the whims of our egos, our desires, and our worldly attachments. As Ibn Taymiyyah once said, "The ego is like a fortress, and the desires are like the soldiers that guard it. If we don't conquer the fortress, the soldiers will conquer us." When we focus on the external rituals, we're not conquering the fortress of our egos. We're simply reinforcing its walls. We're not transforming our desires. We're simply indulging them in a more socially acceptable way. Another consequence of our external focus is the disconnection from our communities. When we focus on the external rituals, we start to see our fellow Muslims as competitors rather than companions. We compare our actions, our knowledge, and our devotion, rather than sharing our struggles, our doubts, and our fears. As a result, we create a culture of isolation, where each person is focused on their own individual salvation, rather than on the collective transformation of the community. We forget that Ramadan is a time for unity, for solidarity, and for shared spiritual growth. As the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, once said, "The believers are like a single body. If one part of the body is in pain, the whole body feels the pain." When we focus on the external rituals, we're not feeling the pain of our fellow Muslims. We're simply numbing ourselves to their struggles. We're not supporting each other, we're simply competing with each other. As we explore these consequences, let's keep in mind that the solution is not to abandon the external rituals, but to transform them from the inside out. Is to focus on the internal transformation, the spiritual growth, and the collective unity that Ramadan is meant to bring. So, let's take a step back, reflect on our approach to Ramadan, and ask ourselves, what are the consequences of my actions? Am I reinforcing the fortress of my ego, or am I conquering it? Am I disconnecting from my community, or am I uniting with them? As we confront the consequences of our external focus, we begin to realize that it's time for a rebellion. It's time to break free from the shackles of our egos, our desires, and our worldly attachments. It's time to reclaim Ramadan as a time of spiritual growth, collective unity, and internal transformation. But how do we do this? How do we break free from the external focus and reclaim the true purpose of Ramadan? One way is to focus on the concept of ikhlas, sincerity. Ikhlas is the intention to seek Allah's pleasure alone, without any desire for external recognition or reward. It's the willingness to do something solely for the sake of Allah, without any expectation of praise or admiration from others. As the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, once said, "Actions are according to their intentions, and everyone will be rewarded according to what they intended." When we focus on ikhlas, we begin to see Ramadan in a new light. We realize that the true purpose of fasting is not to impress others with our piety, but to seek Allah's pleasure alone. We understand that the true purpose of prayer is not to show off our devotion, but to connect with Allah in a deeply personal way. Another way to break free is to focus on the concept of tawakkul, trust. Tawakkul is the willingness to trust Allah completely, without any doubt or hesitation. It's the confidence that Allah is in control, and that He will guide us and protect us every step of the way. As Ibn Qayyim once said, tawakkul is the fruit of ikhlas. When a person has ikhlas, they will have tawakkul. When we focus on tawakkul, we begin to see Ramadan as a time of surrender, rather than a time of self-effort. We realize that we're not in control, and that Allah is the one who guides us and protects us. We understand that our actions are not the cause of our success, but rather the result of Allah's mercy and guidance. As we explore these concepts, let's keep in mind that breaking free from the external focus requires a radical shift in our perspective. It requires us to challenge our assumptions, to question our motivations, and to seek a deeper understanding of the true purpose of Ramadan. So, let's take a step back, reflect on our approach to Ramadan, and ask ourselves, am I seeking Allah's pleasure alone, or am I seeking external recognition? Am I trusting Allah completely, or am I relying on my own self-effort? As we reflect on our approach to Ramadan, and as we seek to break free from the external focus, we come to a profound realization. We realize that the true purpose of Ramadan is not just to fast, to pray, or to give charity, but to awaken to the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is that Allah is the only reality. He is the only one who exists, the only one who is worthy of worship, and the only one who can bring us true fulfillment and happiness. As the Quran says, "And the worldly life is not but amusement and diversion, and indeed the home of the hereafter. That is the true life if only they knew." 29:64. When we awaken to this ultimate truth, we begin to see the world in a new light. We realize that everything we see, everything we experience, and everything we possess is fleeting and ephemeral. We understand that the only thing that truly lasts is our relationship with Allah. As Ibn Arabi, a great Islamic mystic, once said, "The only thing that remains is Allah, and the only thing that is real is the relationship between the servant and the Lord." When we grasp this ultimate truth, we begin to live our lives differently. We begin to prioritize our relationship with Allah above all else. We begin to see Ramadan not just as a month of fasting and prayer, but as a catalyst for spiritual growth, self-transformation, and awakening to the ultimate truth. As we come to the end of this journey, let's reflect on the ultimate truth that Ramadan has revealed to us. Let's ask ourselves, have I awakened to the ultimate truth? Have I prioritized my relationship with Allah above all else? Have I allowed Ramadan to transform me, to awaken me, and to bring me closer to the ultimate reality? If we have, then we can truly say that we have experienced the ultimate purpose of Ramadan. We have experienced the awakening, the transformation, and the ultimate truth that this blessed month has to offer. And if we haven't, then let's not worry, let's not despair. Let's simply acknowledge where we are and let's make a commitment to continue on this journey of spiritual growth, self-transformation, and awakening to the ultimate truth. For in the end, it's not about achieving some kind of spiritual perfection. It's about being on the journey, being on the path, and being open to the ultimate truth that Allah has to reveal to us.